Carson. She has been a design leader at many important companies, and she has gone between working on, core product design and asking to help form a growth team. And so I think she'll be able to speak to a lot of the experiences that many people in the audience and watching later on LinkedIn and YouTube will have had as well. So I will get off stage and leave it to you.
Thanks so much. Hey, everybody. I'm going to share screen and show you some slides. And for a moment, you'll see two of my faces. Okay, so hopefully, if there's any issues, hopefully people will like come off mute and be like, something's not working. So hey, I'm Sally, she, her pronouns. I'm really excited to chat with everybody today. Today, I'm going to be talking about career growth, about accelerating your career growth. My goal is by the end of the day, you're going to have a handful of tips that you can put into use starting today that will help you with how your boss views your performance. And really, I think this is top of mind because as I think about 2024 with layoffs happening all around us, we can't control whether or not we get laid off, but we can optimize for not getting laid off by being known as a top performer. And I think these tips will help you there. And we'll also talk about, if you've got this feeling of stagnating in your career, I'm going to give you some tips for how to bust through that and kind of demystify how leadership talks about performance. And of course, we'll have a Q&A at the end. I think my talk is about 25 minutes, and we'll have about 25 minutes for a Q&A that we'll do through the Zoom chat. So let's get it started. So who am I? I've been in tech for about 25 years. I'm a former startup founder and CEO. I'm a former Fortune 50 company executive. I've raised venture capital. I've brought products to market. I've led many, many teams. It's kind of cool. I feel very lucky because my career has been really varied. I've worked in consumer web. I've worked in B2B. I've worked in tiny early stage startups, all the way through growth stage, hyper growth, through an acquisition. And I've worked in like large, mature enterprise level companies. So I can speak to a lot of different environments. And hopefully that'll be helpful during the Q&A because I can speak to a lot of different situations that you all are probably in. Most recently, I led design for LinkedIn Jobs. And that's the hiring marketplace. You go to post a job on LinkedIn, you go to find a job on LinkedIn. I was leading the design team there. And what I do today, I'm a career coach and a leadership coach. I do some executive coaching as well. And you'll find me on LinkedIn posting about topics like managing up. Find me there. And I'm currently like thinking there's been enough interest and demand about the stuff I'm posting on LinkedIn that I'm kind of incubating. Okay, maybe I'll do an online training or course or something around these topics. So let me know if you think you'd be interested in something like that. I'd love feedback. It's early days for me. And I love talking about this stuff. Weirdly, I'm like weirdly passionate about talking about people's careers, about helping them demystify what's blocking them in their career growth. And nothing gives me more pleasure than seeing somebody like reach that next level that I know has been a goal for them. Those have been the most satisfying and gratifying moments in my career. So this just lights me up. So I'm happy to chat about this. So let's talk about your career. If you can, okay, I'm gonna have to figure out how this is gonna work because can you type in the chat and then I'm gonna go to the chat and see what you're posting. Then I'll start screen sharing again. What's your current job title and where do you work? So let me head back over to the chat. Let's see if this works. We'll see. If the chat's not working, it's totally okay. I'll just, okay. CEO founder, awesome. Senior, hey Jessica, cool. Hey Allison, I know some folks in the chat. Founder, oh awesome, okay, we got some founders. Senior product designer, great. My background's in product design as well. This is cool. Keep it coming. This is really fun. It's fun to see like, oh, say, hey Steve. Nice, we got some friendlies here. We got some buddies that I know. I'm gonna go back to the slides. Keep posting where you're at, where where you work, what your title is, because it'll help me kind of tailor the Q&A and what I'm talking about to you. Okay, so back to my 25 years in tech. This isn't about me, this is about you, but I think this will be helpful. I'm the first decade of my career I spent as an individual contributor, as an IC, shorthand for individual contributor. I was a product designer, user experience designer. And then the next 15 years, more recently, I've been in leadership. And so I've been a manager, senior manager, director, senior director, VP, and I've been a CEO and founder. And I would have called myself like a top performer during the IC phase of my career. And I think I was contributing really good work. And I think I was like not too much of a pain in the butt to work with. But once I became a leader, I had this awful like season of like remembering the stuff I was doing as an IC or failing to do. And I felt so embarrassed. But more importantly, I felt like I wasted a ton of time. Like if I had known then as an IC what I know now as a leader, how leaders measure your performance, how we talk about your performance, what we talk about behind closed doors when we're considering whether or not you're ready for promotion. I wish I had known those things as an IC, because I think that 10 years probably could have, it took me, for me to even get the promotion to senior designer, I had to jump companies. I wasn't able to get promoted within a company. But now, knowing what I know now, I think I could have gotten that promotion much sooner and within the company without having to jump. So let's save you some time by sharing what I learned as a leader. So here we have what I have named the pyramid of top performance. Trademark. It's not trademarked. I hope I will come up with a jazzier name. So if you have a better name than this, send it in the chat and I'll check it out later. It's very like conjoined triangle of success if anybody's watched Silicon Valley here. So I'm trying to avoid that or embrace it. So here we have the pyramid of top performance. At the foundation, no matter what, like what you have to do at work is just be a pleasure to work with. That means no drama, no gossiping, don't be a toxic team member, don't complain at work. I was at lunch at the LinkedIn cafeteria last year, and I overheard some like engineers like really complaining in a very toxic way about their boss and the project they're on, which is totally fine. Don't do that at work. Like that goes outside of the building to the happy hour bar where no one's listening in. Because if they ever got rotated on a team that I was going to work on, they've already like planted a seed in my head that they're very toxic, right? So just be a pleasure to work with. No drama, no gossip, no complaining, right? That's like foundational. No matter how junior or early career you are, these are things that you could do from day one as you're building your craft, as you're building your skills. So our little hiker here is climbing up the mountain, the pyramid of top performance. Speaking of skills, do great work. Just be reliable, deliver your projects on time, deliver results for the business. This is really the meat of what you've been hired to do, right? And what your manager is looking for you to do in your role. And most people would say, like, isn't this enough? Like, I'm a pleasure to work with, no complaints there. I'm delivering my projects on time, on budget. Actually, there's this final little chunk of the pyramid, and that's going to be the focus of the talk today. So you have to also tell leadership about the work that you're doing. And a lot of people don't enjoy this. A lot of people are like, I have to do more work on top of just the project level work. What the heck? But that's what we'll talk about today. Let's make it easy. What's the minimal way that you can do this to help your career? So AKA managing up, right? Like part of managing up is just telling leadership what you're up to. What are you doing? So symptoms that you're stuck here in that middle bar of what was it, our triangle of pyramid of top performance. You're doing great work, you're a pleasure to work with. Here's how it might feel like on your end. My boss is micromanaging me. I'm curious. I mean, this is interesting. Giving talks like this, people are not going to jump into the chat and be like, yeah, I'm having this problem. My boss is a micromanager. So that's kind of what's fun about being a coach, is you get to talk to people privately. Everyone I work with, my cross-functional partners on my team, they say I'm awesome. What the heck? But I haven't been promoted in years. I hear this quite a lot where it's like, listen, I'm delivering great work. Everybody has nothing but great things to say for me. Why am I not getting promoted to senior, to staff? Or you might say, my work should speak for itself, right? And I'm not trying to give you a hard time. This is all written for like that IC Sally, the first 10 years of her career. These are all things that I would have said, thought to myself, right? So I'm coaching myself. These are the things I wish I had learned. So let's talk about managing up. Again, I'm going to turn off the screen share for a second so that I can see what you're typing in the chat. Type in the chat, when you hear the words managing up, what does that mean to you? There's no wrong answers. I just want to like learn from you here. And I'll read out some of what I'm seeing. Cool, and I see some more titles came in as well. Thanks for that, everybody. Oh yeah, thanks, Allison. Reminder to send your chats to everyone so everybody sees what you chat. What does managing up mean to you? Kissing butt, great, love it. Keep them coming. I'm in a Slack community last night where people were like, I'm sick of kissing butt. I'm burned out. Love it. It's a very common answer. Being proactive by passing along information to your managers. Nice role. Detailing your work, sharing, evangelizing. Great. Influencing your leaders. These are some great answers. Helping my manager understand how my work is going to impact their goals. Make sure I also add my 2 cents into org strategy. This is awesome. Okay, cool. Thanks, everybody. Keep them coming. Keep those answers coming in. I'll go back to my slides. Some great answers, too. Okay, so let's reframe managing up. I think this might be helpful. I'm thinking of managing up lately, and let me know if you like this framing, as MVP, minimum viable politics. And I say this as someone who hates organizational politics. So I'm trying to like demystify, how your manager thinks about performance. There's also a reality of like every company has some amount of politics, even if it's a flat org. There's always some power dynamic at play. So like, let's be real about that. But what's like the minimum amount of effort that we can put in to be successful in our careers? So thank you, Mercy, for your contribution. Managing up is not kissing up to your boss. It's also not bragging. I think a lot of people get stuck here about the like, tell people what you're working on because they're like, oh, that feels like bragging. And I think there's a way to like align with your boss's goals, which we'll talk about, in a way that actually supports their success. So it's not about you bragging. It's about you feeding them the information they need so that they can be seen as a top performer as well. It's not about doing grunt work in the office. And it's also not about being gross or douchey or manipulative. I hope it's okay if I said douchey on the call. What managing up is, and we had some good answers around this, aligning with your boss on their goals, sending your boss the right information proactively, and really like at the root of it, it's about saving your energy so you can be strategic with your career. Again, minimum viable politics. So let's talk about what is leadership. I was thinking about this recently. So servant leadership is a term that many of us have heard in the last few years. I actually really like the idea of servant leadership. I consider myself a servant leader. I believe in this model of leadership. You're there to serve your teams. However, I think using this as your only frame of reference for leadership when you're an IC can actually do you a disservice because it puts you in the mode of like, they're here to serve me. What am I getting out of my boss? When really you want to have this like aligned partnership with your boss where you're like co-creating and delivering on goals together. And there's a lot of trust there, right? So what is the role of the manager? The role of the manager is to hire and retain great talent and deliver results for the business. And hiring and retaining great talent is all in service of delivering results. So I went a little crazy with the slides here. I was like, deliver results for the business. And I even had a slide where I was just like, results. And I had it like repeated all over the slide 100 times. Results, results. If there's one thing you take away, it's all about delivering results. But this is key. This is what we've been hired to do in our roles. And this is what our boss has been hired to do as well. So you're back to your pyramid of top performance where you've stalled out in the middle. You're like, what the heck? Well, I am delivering results for the business. I'm doing my great work. I'm delivering my projects. There's the results right there. But when we talk about tell leadership about the work you're doing, we're not just talking about status updates, status reporting. We're talking about the results you're delivering to the business. Tell leadership about the results you're delivering to the business. And that might lead you to say, how do I do that? What's the right way? And there's a lot of nuance here. And I think that's why it's important that we have the Q&A at the end so we can kind of tailor what we're talking about to your situation. And I'm happy to do so. But I do have some tips for you. So right now today, if you don't mind, type in the chat, how does your boss find out about the results that you're delivering to the business today? And I'll just like stop screen sharing for a minute because I want to come back to you. This is fun because I get to see what's top of mind for everybody. One-on-one weekly, great. Good, design crits, love it. Love it, love it. This is great. There's just some good answers in here. Cool. Yep, one-on-ones, very typical. Town halls, neat. Slack weekly updates, that's cool. I like the idea of like using async where you can. It kind of depends on the culture, right? Cool. Weekly product meetings with leadership team. Great. Okay, I'm gonna go back to sharing. Thank you. Keep those answers coming because I'm gonna look at all of them at the end there. All right, so again, we talked about this early. Managing up it's aligning with your boss on their goals. It's giving your manager the right information and giving it to them proactively. And it's ultimately about saving your energy because we're trying to be strategic about what can you control, what can't you control, doing what's in your power to advance your career. So let's talk about how we align with your boss's OKRs. Some of you might already be doing this. It's kind of a crappy slide, I'm sorry, but I suggest if you're doing something new in general, a new process with your boss, I recommend give them a heads up ahead of time. Like you're going to talk to them about this in a one-on-one, but if you use Slack, for example, send them a little Slack to say, hey, we got our one-on-one a few days from now. I'd like to spend most of the one-on-one like talking to you about what your OKRs are, manager. And I want to think of ways that I can help support your OKRs. Maybe we can co-create an OKR for me to help support one of the OKRs that you're delivering. So give them the heads up. Anytime you're doing anything new that's unexpected, if you want a quality response from your manager, this is coming from me. I'm an introvert, so I like a little heads up time. Just give them a heads up asynchronously a few days ahead of time so that they can be like, oh, okay, I'm thinking about that. What OKR could I carve off where they could help support that? Um, and then when you're in that one-on-one, it's probably a 30-minute, once a week one-on-one. Ideally, you're spending most of that time like going through the OKRs that they have that they're able to share with you. There might be OKRs that are on their plate that they can't share because leadership is privy to some information that's private. But what they can share, one, it's really helpful for you to learn more about the business to see what is my manager responsible for delivering to the business. It gives you a real insight in how their performance is being managed as well, because there's this whole ladder up the reporting structure where your boss's boss is assessing their performance based on what your boss is able to deliver via you. So what you want to come out of at the end of this one-on-one is an OKR that you and your boss have co-created. You've like picked off one of their OKRs and said, hey, I could help support that. You're hiring interns. Maybe I could do like the first round of phone screens with interns or do resume reviews, whatever that is that they're responsible for delivering this quarter. Pick off something where you can help support it. And you've crafted your own OKR that ladders up to theirs. And then, of course, you're going to deliver on the OKR, right? You're going to deliver results for the business, and you're going to be reporting to them on how that's going as you go. And if they give you good feedback, if they like this process, I want you to like start a cadence of doing this every single quarter or whatever your OKR planning cadence is. As you're going into planning cycles to update OKRs, ensure that you're creating OKRs that ladder up to your bosses. And what you're doing is like you're building trust. You're showing your boss that you're proactive. You're showing your boss that you have some fluency around the language of the business and what they're responsible for delivering to the business. And because you're delivering, right, they can start to count on you for delivering some of these things. So I gave like a loose example. There might be company level KPIs. So KPIs are more evergreen things that don't change generally. So they might be like revenue oriented KPIs like MRR. Maybe your boss has a quarterly OKR about, we could increase adoption by this percentage. And then maybe you've got a supporting OKR around like A/B testing and do feature that might help push adoption up. So you can see how like your OKRs ladder up all the way up to that KPI level for the org. And then you want to use metrics to report on the results that you're delivering. So what we're trying to avoid is just status updates like I spent this much time in Figma working on my designs. It's more about like what are the outcomes or what are the results. And when I say the results that you're delivering, I'm including the cross-functional team that you're working with. So you might be a product designer or product manager. You might be reporting to a group PM or a manager of product design. And you're sharing like, here's what my cross-functional team is up to. So again, it's not bragging. It's not like, here's what I did. It's like, here's what the results are that we're getting back from that A/B test, that experiment that we're running. And it's looking good, but we're getting some surprise, outcomes over here. So here's what we're going to tweak as a result. You're trying to give them an insight into like, what are the activities and outcomes that are coming out of your cross-functional team in order for them to be able to like answer their boss. If their boss is like, hey, what's going on with this initiative? They already have that answer packaged up from you because you're proactively pushing it to them. And when you're thinking about how to shape the metrics that you're reporting, this is a good time to like lean on your boss to have them help coach you on how to shape these bits of information you're feeding to them. But one tip I have is pay attention at your company all hands meeting, what metrics are being shared there, what evergreen KPIs are being shared there. If the CEO is getting up, once a month and reporting on certain KPIs, or the CFO, the chief financial officer, that's really meaningful, right? That means it's really important to the business. So even if it's a little too much, it's a little overwhelming. Oftentimes these things are recorded as well. So you can like take notes as you're watching it, watch the recording, start to ask people that you trust. You could even make friends with people in finance and say, hey, help me make a sense of like, why do we talk about MRR? Or, what's this metric that we track and why is that meaningful for the business? I always encourage folks to have a buddy in finance that can help translate these things for them. And I also encourage you to sit in on other team meetings. So think about adjacent functions that maybe you collaborate with sometimes, but you don't typically go to their all hands. Maybe you go to the engineering all hands. Maybe you go to the data science all hands, right? Like what are adjacent functions where you can see how their leaders are reporting on metrics that are important to them. And then ask your boss to connect the dots between your OKRs, your project level work, all the way to those org level evergreen KPIs and like metrics that you would see at different levels reporting on in between. Hopefully that's clear, but if not, we can chat about it in the Q&A. And this is maybe the most important thing, like be proactive about giving your boss information. So if you're feeling micromanaged, and this was certainly me earlier in my career, it's likely a symptom that you're not proactively pushing information enough to your boss. And so what you want to do is iterate on like, what's the level of information that your boss needs? And when do they need that information? What form do they want it in? And so again, I would encourage you, tell your boss you're going to try something different. Maybe tell them asynchronously ahead of time, ahead of one-on-one, and say, hey, I want to make sure I'm sending you the right level of information. I want to make sure you're equipped with the info that you need, but I don't want to overwhelm you with like the minutia. So I'm going to try something. I'm going to start just like every week ahead of our one-on-one, I'm going to put little blurbs, like a few bullet points on each project or initiative I'm working on, just with status updates so that you can review them at your leisure. If you have any follow-up questions, we can discuss it in depth in the one-on-one. But I'd also love feedback on the level of detail and the format that you'd like that in. And tell them like ultimately what you're trying to get to is if their boss comes and asks them for an update, you want it to be like so perfected that they can just copy paste what you've already written essentially and send it to their boss. That's what we're trying to get to. But I think it helps to tell your boss that you're doing this and be clear that you're going to iterate until they're satisfied with that right level of detail. You don't want to give them too much detail because they've got a lot going on. Like bosses are, they're running around, they've got 10 meetings a day, they've got tons of direct reports. The context switching is pretty insane when you're in leadership. And so if you're too needy, I hesitate to say this word, but there are direct reports who are too needy, giving too much, too fine grained, and that can be quite annoying. So you want to tune that level of detail that's supporting your boss and their goals. So again, you're delivering results to the business and that ladders up to what they're delivering. It ladders up to how they're being perceived and their performance is being measured by their boss. So again, it's not braggy, right? You're helping equip them with the info they need to be successful in their role. One other thing I want to say about this is like, try to not use your one-on-one just for like project status updates, right? It's not the best use of your one-on-one. So the more that you can put just like, project status updates, this isn't even metrics. It's just like, what's the state of this project? The more you can do that async in your one-on-one doc and then just leave the one-on-one for follow-up questions, it really like opens up some of that one-on-one time for what they're really for, which is more like career coaching, professional development, feedback, things like that. And ultimately, like we said, we want to save your energy by being strategic with your career. So some ideas that I have for you here, and there's a lot here, there's a lot of nuance, again, depending on your org, but the idea is you want to build relationships with folks across the business that are influential. And there's a lot of questions there on like, how do you figure out who's influential, right? There's certain people who, I think product managers tend to be more influential, but again, if it's a huge org, it depends on what product area they're working on. If it's a key initiative that the C-level executives are reporting on regularly, and it's the product leader who owns that initiative, they're probably fairly influential. But if you're kind of junior in the org, how do you find people that are influential? You might pay attention to folks who are regularly asked to report out to teams at their all hands or company at the all hands, see who's getting assigned really high impact projects that are critical for the business at the moment. There's different ideas there, but you want to create this like constellation of folks across the org who are, trustworthy and ideally influential, who are singing your praises when you're not in the room. Like, oh, did you see what Shelby delivered? Like she was running this initiative. You should really see this readout deck. I'll send it to you. And ask, I don't think it's gross to ask people explicitly, like, hey, you're about to go into this, meeting I didn't get invited to. If this comes up, like, do you mind like talking about the work I did here so that they're aware of it? Be specific about your ask. It's not just like amplify me for the sake of amplifying. It's more like you might be on the campaign trail for some cool thing you just delivered to the business and be specific about like, hey, if this comes up, do you mind mentioning that I have a readout deck that I did? And, you could Slack them the link, for example, and do the same for others, right? It's an exchange. So type in the chat, are there any tips? Well, okay, first we talked about kind of reframing, right? We reframed like, what is managing up? Is it gross? Is it braggy? Is it okay to do that? And then we talked a little bit about tips for how to manage up and how to send the right level of information to your boss to help make them successful. I'm curious, are there any tips that you've heard today that you're going to try out this week? Again, I'll stop the share, boop-a-doo, and come back to the chat. Thanks, Mercy. What do we got? Curious to see what folks are going to try. Awesome, Steve. Yeah, stop using my one-on-ones for nothing but status updates. It's hard, right? Especially, Steve, I think you're pretty senior, so you probably have a lot on your plate. Same, Steve. Great. Yeah, status updates can just be like put them in the doc. They're available for your boss. And in fact, I find that as a manager, I was juggling so much that I found that helpful, because even if you told me the update in the one-on-one, it's just like I'm hearing it, but I don't retain it. So I'm going to need it captured in the doc anyway. And people who have reported to me know I take crazy notes. Like my one-on-one docs are so long because I'm essentially transcribing. Like if you're giving me a juicy update, I'm like, okay, wait, slow down. Okay. Revenue and this percentage and this A/B test. Okay, I'm writing it down. So you're also alleviating your boss of either the burden of having to remember that stuff or write it down as well. And they can trust that they have a reference point in your one-on-one doc where it's like their boss is asking them for an update on the initiative. They could just, Command F and find that little bit and copy paste or read exactly what you've already written. So that's great. One-on-one doc isn't something you've used. Good. Yeah, start using the shared one-on-one doc and you can both add stuff to it. It's really nice. You can like at your boss if there's something critical that you need. It's also nice to like not Slack your boss all day long because they're in and out of meetings. So if it's not urgent, just put it in the one-on-one doc and they know that you'll talk to them about it like when it's time. Long live the one-on-one doc. Go back here. Great. Thanks for sharing answers, everybody. That's great. So that's about it. Like I said, I'm posting about this stuff on LinkedIn. I can go really, really deep on this stuff, and I love talking about this stuff. So this was kind of like, scratching the surface. It's just like high level view of like some different ways that you can think about accelerating your career so you don't get stuck in that middle part of the pyramid like I did for a decade. So if this stuff is interesting to you, give me a follow on LinkedIn. I've also got a link there to my Substack newsletter. And like I said, I'm incubating maybe some like demystifying career advancement, how to manage up style online training. So if that sounds interesting, send me a DM on LinkedIn too. My DMs are generally open. So I'd love to hear feedback or questions about what you heard. And if something like a training sounds of interest to you, that's more like fuel in my tank to make something like that happen. It's the kind of thing that when I was a manager, I would have loved to have had something like that to send people to, but I'm curious to get everybody's feedback on it. So thank you so much. I'm going to turn off the screen share so we can do Q&A. Boop-a-doo. And thanks for participating in the chat, everybody.
Oh my gosh, that was so good.
Thank you.
I wish I had that advice, 10 years ago. That was
yeah, thanks. Same. If only we had a time machine.
I know, exactly. But that's why it's like, let's please learn from anyone else. Rahul has a question for you about how to organize a one-on-one doc so it's not so messy.
That's really good. I've seen some really organized ones. They're somewhat ephemeral, right? Like mine have room for improvement. Mine tend to be just like reverse chronological, and it's just like the date of the most recent one-on-one that that's coming up, and then just bulleted stuff. And sometimes it'll be like, a chunk for the direct report. So it's like Peter, my direct report, and then a chunk for Sally. And so I'm adding my questions for updates throughout the week. Peter's adding his. I've seen folks put more structure into it. You might have an area that's like, project level status updates, kind of professional development updates if you're working on something there, open questions, areas where you're blocked. But I'm kind of like, I'm always the pragmatist. So I'm like, what's the minimum amount of like structure? I can get really fiddly. I can get super fiddly into like perfecting templates. So I'm good with just like reverse cron, bulleted list, one chunk for the manager, one chunk for the direct report. And it's really like, the one-on-one is for the direct report too. So it's your time. That's my philosophy. It's your time. It's not your manager's time. Your manager might ask you questions, but it's really your time to help develop your career. So the more you can offload some of that like status update kind of stuff, just put it in the doc and try to leverage that time for coaching is better.
Yeah, absolutely. And we actually had from the last question from the last session with Andrew Chen, a question that we saved, which was, for designers working in growth, what are your predictions for how design will evolve?
Oh, that's so good. I think one of my like off the cuff predictions is like 2024, a lot of designers are suddenly becoming growth designers because when there's whether or not you know it, right? And I've been talking to a lot of designers who have only worked in startups, um, and they're thinking about pivoting into more established, mature companies or larger scale enterprise companies. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I think the strategy there is position yourself as a growth designer, because
Hmm.
startup designers tend to be growth designers. Like if you're early stage startup, you're iterating on an MVP, and that's very like quant metrics driven. You're like looking at the data, seeing what's working, iterating, testing variants.
Hmm.
So you're doing a lot of the muscle that is growth design. And so if you're trying to like take that experience as a startup founder, and it's like there's this big barrier to get into enterprise, pitch yourself as a growth designer and do it in 2024, because when there's an economic slump, there's a lot of like product teams in-house in large scale enterprise teams. When I say enterprise in this case, I'm not talking about like B2B software. I'm talking about like a big org with tens of thousands
Oh,
of
size of
employees.
company.
Yeah,
Yeah.
size of company. So when you're trying to like place yourself there, a lot of these teams within these in-house like big companies, instead of them working, and I can speak to like my experience at LinkedIn, we saw this happening somewhat. Instead of working on these like long-term strategic initiatives that are like many
Hmm.
quarters out, you're trying to kind of like uh, pad the company with revenue to protect it from an economic winter. And so suddenly you're doing tons of like revenue-driven experiments. You're iterating quickly, tons and tons of experiments. So my team at LinkedIn Jobs, in the time that I was there, the economic downturn hit in the middle of my time there, and my team transitioned from being just like a traditional in-house, product cross-functional team
Hmm.
to we're now a growth team. So we're just
Yeah.
running dozens and dozens of experiments to try to like eke out additional revenue because we're operating at scale. So I don't know if that
Yeah.
answers the question, but that's kind of like how I'm thinking about growth and how to be
Yeah.
strategic with your career when it comes to growth
And
design.
that was at LinkedIn, that was a mandate from leadership for your team, right?
Yeah, we were already
Yeah.
responsible for a significant portion of the revenue in the business, so it was already like a
Right.
driver. But then it's like, okay, well, how can we turn the screws to kind of like dial that up a bit? And I liked how they saw the economic downturn coming, and I actually appreciate this. They're like, let's get ahead of this, and the more that we can like eke out more revenue, it's going to protect us from potential like layoffs in the future. So I actually appreciate that direction from leadership.
Yeah. Carb loading.
Yeah, exactly. Get ready for winter, hibernate.
Yeah. Shannon has a question. So, say you're doing all this great stuff and you're, doing the best that you can to manage it, but the manager you have is just like a bit of a dud.
Yeah.
They're just not great at it. And maybe new. It's so hard to learn how to manage people when no one really tells you. How do you deal with
Yes.
that person?
Man, that's so hard. I have also been a dud manager, I'm pretty sure. Like my first time in
Same.
management, I just didn't know what I
Yeah.
was doing. Yeah. So apologies to Shannon, and just like thank you to all the ICs out there, all the grace that they've given like yeah, new managers. And there's different flavors of it, right? It might just be a manager who's like new in the role, has the best intentions, but is just kind of getting their feet under them and doesn't know doesn't know what they don't know.
Mm,
There's also managers who are ineffective. This is more worrisome, like managers that are ineffective or even toxic. It's kind of a
yeah.
spectrum. Like there's
Hmm.
ineffective managers that know they're not effective and they're working on it. And that's like, okay, let's
Yeah.
give them grace, give them time. There's managers who are ineffective or just like lack influence in the org, but they don't know it. So they're lacking self-awareness. And that's actually really troublesome. It's hard to diagnose.
Yeah.
But I've worked with leaders before who like didn't have influence, and I kept like working through them to try to like leverage their influence, and it turned out they didn't have it.
Mm,
If they're a dud, I mean, that is where you can start to recruit partners and peers across the org to sing your praises. So you might find
mm,
people who have been at the org for a long time. They've got a lot of history there. They seem to be highly regarded. Just you hear their name a lot. Maybe you could try to get some mentorship from them, and maybe they can help you
mm,
make sense of your situation. You might also look at like who is this is tricky because some people are like empire builders. Like if it's a bigger org, there's some
yeah.
people who are just like, I'm hiring, I'm taking this team, I'm taking this team, and that's like a archetype. But sometimes
Yeah.
people just get consistently get more budget to hire, and that's like some signal that like they're doing something right, and like maybe you could get some mentorship from them. So uh, you can also start to like build alliances with adjacent teams, and maybe there's a rotation there that can also
Yeah.
backfire in a bad way. But you do have options, and I'd say like at the very least having that chat with your manager about like how are they being measured in the performance of their role, and how can you help support them? And it might
Mm,
be illuminating to hear like how do they think about their role, like and talk about like for yourself, like ask your manager, what does success in my role look like? Like what does it look like? I would encourage you to do this even if you're just interviewing for the role too. Like, what does a top performer
Yeah.
in this role look like?
Are there any red flags or tells that you've seen to help people tell the difference? Because obviously, as soon as possible, right,
Hmm.
between is this person like green and effective, or is
Yeah.
this person just like toxic and like they're just self optimizing?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, some toxic behavior is like they're throwing people in their own team under the bus, right? They're not taking
Yeah.
responsibility for themselves. Like a good leader will take responsibility for um, poor performance on their team. Like that is their
Yeah.
responsibility. So if somebody's failing to deliver, they're on their team. That's the role of the leader to kind of fix that. So undermining their team, hoarding information in a way that undermines their team's ability to do the
Yeah.
best work. Um, Oh man, there's so like claiming credit for stuff. I wish we had like after hours. I could be like, let me tell you the tea. Let me tell you this gossip about
I
this one place. You wouldn't
know.
believe it. Like we've all got the stories, right? Um, but I think it's key. That's why it's important to find people who you trust who are not gossiping. I think there's a really clear difference too between like gossip versus someone giving you the information you need to be successful in your role. So if someone's like, hey, this person's toxic or like a bully or just bad person, like don't trust them, that's
Mhm.
helpful information, right? That's different than gossip, which is just kind of trash talking to blow off steam. So
Yeah.
finding those alliances within the org, especially people who have history there who can help you make sense of things.
Yeah. And another question that we have from Pravina in the audience is how to deal with some kind of like if you have a personal issue, right? And you're super drained, you're not
Yeah.
at the level of performance that you want to be. How do you manage that? And are there any
Hmm.
things to do or not to do? And communicating and sharing that stuff with your manager and setting expectations.
That's so tough. I mean, I've been in that situation. I was just like so heavily burned out in the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic. I think I'm hearing this from so many people. Like so many people I know are on
Yeah.
emergency mental health leaves of absence. Um, we're just still kind of feeling those knock-on effects of like what we've all just been through. So that's very
Yeah.
real. Um, you know, ideally you have a trusting relationship. You've built rapport with your manager. They trust you. They know what you're capable of. And it's quite possible they've seen your performance slip. And if you think that's the case, I think it actually shows great self-awareness for you to say, talk to your manager about it. Like, hey, listen, I know I'm not operating at the level I know I'm capable of. This is what I think's going on. Um, I personally, maybe I'm old school. I also feel like it's okay to not tell them your whole personal life. You don't have to be like, then I broke up with my boyfriend. And then, I think it's okay to be like, I've got some really heavy stuff going on in my personal life and I don't really feel comfortable sharing all of it, but I'm going through a really hard time right now. And I wanted to share that I'm aware my performance isn't where I need to be. I've told my boss too in the past, like, give me a month. Like I know I'm going to come out of this. I know I'm just not at my best right now. Give me a month and I should be better if you think it's a short-term thing. Um, Meaning like I expect my performance is going to rebound and come right back because it's lumpy, right? Like we're not all
Yeah.
consistently top performers. Sometimes we just have insomnia and we're like, look, I'm just exhausted or just sick or have COVID or something. Um, if there's not a trusting relationship there, that's tough, right? Because you can't really level with your manager. Some managers kind of lack that basic humanity that I love to see a manager who's like empathetic, warm, thoughtful, conscientious, but sometimes our managers don't have those traits. And if there's not trust there, then it can become kind of dangerous, right? Professionally to open up and
Yeah.
admit you're not performing. So I'd use your discernment there about like, what is your relationship like with your manager? And again, if they're toxic, if they're going to weaponize that against you, maybe just do what you can to withhold that information, unfortunately, and seek out resources
Yeah.
elsewhere.
Yeah. A follow-up that came into the chat is if you've left an org as a result of a toxic manager, you tried and it doesn't work,
Hmm.
how do you get past that feeling of being like stuck, and
Yeah,
it will show up in job interviews. I'm sure we've all interviewed that person. You're like, they seem great,
yeah,
but they were so burned out or still seem
yes,
scarred from their last experience. Like, how do you work through
yeah.
that so that you can then go show your best self and get that next good opportunity?
That's really good. I mean, my head went straight to like, is there a sauna that you have access to? I'm like such a fan of like get in some
Yeah.
hot water, like
Your
do
body
things
knows the
that
score.
right? Like first and foremost, just take care of you and do things that just, will soothe your nervous system. That's like step one, right? It's like sleep and healthy food and sunshine and sauna. But when it comes to like one, how you feel about that situation, which sometimes there's grief or even trauma to process. There's like straight up work trauma. Um, and then how do you tell that story when you're ready to, look for your next role? I think it's really about like, what's the story you're telling yourself, and is there an opportunity to reframe that? And I think that sets the stage for you to tell a really compelling story when you get to interview, because when I'm interviewing people, the number one thing I'm looking for is self-awareness and like growth mindset. And so if you come in and you're like, so we'll work backwards from the interview, right? It's like you're interviewing for a new role. You've just come out of this really toxic situation at your workplace. A great way to frame it is like, man, I don't feel like I was set up for success. And like, here's what was going on. And you don't have to go, I wouldn't go really, really deep into like, here's how awful it was. But like,
Yeah.
Talk about like, it was really hard, but I'm actually really grateful to have had that experience because I learned this about myself and this is what I'm doing differently as a result. And I actually feel like I came out of that a much stronger, performer, a much stronger employee as a result. And then kind of working backwards from that, like that's also a really healthy reframe for you. It's like, okay, we kind of have this mindset at work, right? It's like, here's the problem. Now, how do we reframe it into the opportunity? And that's really hard to do when you're in the stuff itself. But once you're able to get yourself out of that toxic situation, hopefully there's some time to process and kind of reframe it for yourself and be like, wow, that was awful, but I'm proud of myself. I'm proud of how I showed up in my values. I'm proud of how I was an ethical person. Sometimes that's just the best we can do, like live by our ethos and our values. And I grew as a result, and I learned a lot about like what I'm not willing to tolerate, and like what I won't put up with in the future.
Yeah. And especially I think like writing it down before you're going into these interviews and practicing, especially if you can feel that trauma, if there's any questions that come up where you're like, man, I hope that they don't ask that. Whew, practice those questions because they are going to ask it.
Yeah.
Like,
right. Yeah.
And then you'll be ready.
Yep. That's right.
Yeah.
These are
One
great
of the
questions.
things that managers are like, have not, a red flag that managers will look for is kind of that old adage where if you meet an asshole like 5 times a day, you're the
Yes.
asshole.
Yeah.
And so, I've interviewed people in the past who are like, should have done the post work trauma, but they kind of get into this like trauma spiral from role to role. And you sit down with them and you just hear about, oh, this moron manager and this moron manager and this moron manager. And they're talking to you and you're like, I'm next.
Yeah.
I'm right there, like, yeah, it'll be me that you're talking about in your next interview.
It's so true. And you're reminding me too, I wish I could remember the name of this model. If anybody else remembers it, let me know. But there's also this like framework it's like a triangle where like the victim actually becomes the bully, and then like you're kind of like chasing there's certain like loops of behavior where you get stuck. You're like, I'm so victimized, but you actually end up like bullying other people. That was a terrible recollection of it. But if that rings a bell. Oh, drama triangle. Thank you.
Drama triangle.
Google the drama triangle. It's so good.
I know.
You'll see that behavior at work, and you'll see it come up sometimes in people's interview questions. If they lack that self-awareness, they're sort of like they move from victimhood into being the bully. Again, I'm not using the right, but thank you, Kelsey.
I
That's
got
awesome.
a link here. It looks like let me see, to everyone. Looks like Ken
Thank you.
wrote
Bring
about
donuts.
this.
Awesome.
He has a great blog.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Ooh, drama llama.
Good stuff.
Brad, let's see. We have another, this is an anonymous question. What advice would you give for someone when their manager isn't helpful in career growth?
Good. I love that we can do anonymous.
Specify sort of what kind, but yeah, I know. Just in case.
I do have tips for this. So one thing I would recommend, and sometimes maybe it's a green manager, right? Maybe they're kind of like, oh, I haven't helped someone with this stuff yet. So one thing I recommend is find the career ladders matrix. Like hopefully your organization has a career ladders document that's available to you that outlines like, here's where you are, here's that next level up. And hopefully it's got like, behaviors or traits or characteristics. It might have scope of influence about like where you are now and what's that next level. And I would create your own Google Doc or Notion, whatever you're using, and paste in like, here's where I'm at now. as a column, and here's that next level up as a column. And then each row is like, if you're doing design, it's like storytelling, and it kind of describes your level, next level up. And it's got a third column where you're self-assessing. And I just keep it simple. Again, it's like minimum viable career stuff. Red is like, for the next level up, I'm not yet consistently performing at this level. Yellow is kind of like sometimes, and green is like, yes, I'm consistently performing at the next level, with some area for notes, like here's proof, here's results I've delivered. I delivered this major initiative. And then have your manager do the same. So, and tell them you're doing this. It's like, hey, I really want to spend some time thinking about what it's going to take for me to get to the next level. Here's what I'm thinking about doing. I'm going to create this spreadsheet. It's going to, document where I'm at, what's next for me. And I'm going to do a self-assessment on where I think I am with the red, yellow, green. And I'd love it if you take some time and give them weeks, because this is a big ask, right? It's going to take them weeks to think about it. I'm going to give you this doc in a few weeks. We'll have a one-on-one. Maybe you can do an assessment for me. And what's most interesting is where there's a disconnect. So it's great if it's like green, 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 yellow, yellow, you both agree, that's great. But the points where you're going to discuss in depth, hopefully during an hour-long one-on-one, is where there's a difference. Either you said green or they said red, or vice versa, to talk through that. It's great if you're like, I'm a red, and they're like, you're a green. You're like, okay, cool, upgrade me to green. But especially interesting if they're like, you're yellow, red, and you think you're green. That's a hot spot, right? That's an area where it's like, okay, for that skill, let's develop a quarterly professional development plan around that. And it can be really self-driven. It's like, go ask your colleagues for, do you have resources around storytelling? Whatever that area is, that it's a hot spot, and you're just slowly picking your way through. And what's awesome is like that doc, once you're all green, and once you're staying all green for a couple quarters, that's a very strong justification for asking for a promotion. And it kind of turns right into a promotion doc, because it's a heavy lift sometimes. At some orgs, a manager has to write this like long doc about like why you're already performing at that next level, and they have to pitch it to their boss or to the senior leadership. So the fact that you're already documenting like, here's proof points that I'm already at this level, you've already done a lot of that hard work for them. So sometimes a promotion is like eliminating the work that's actually necessary for your boss to advocate for your promotion.
Yeah. I would add like finding your own resources. I think one of the most surprising questions I ever got as a manager from a direct report who's only a few years out of school, and they came up to me in a one-on-one and they said, what is your plan for my career?
Servant leadership.
I was like, yeah. I'm like, interesting. I'm like,
yeah,
you should have some goals. Like I can't say, hey, you're going to be, work at designing aerospace engines. Like, how does that sit? That's my plan for your career. Like, let's go from there. You have to have something that you're curious about. And I think oftentimes we can see these ladders and careers, especially early on, as a straightforward path, and by the time you get into your like late 30s and early 40s, you turn around and you're like, wow, that was a walk through, the forest of no return, and many branches hit my face. There wasn't some sort of thing where I'm like, here I'm going, and then I went there and good job.
That's so true. I think it was Doug Song, the CEO of Dual Security, where I worked, where he talked about it's much more like rock climbing. You're kind of like, what's your next move? You might move sideways, you might move kind of adjacent. And there's a lot of improvisation.
Constant problem solving too. I like rock climbing for that. Because you're looking at the thing ahead and you're like, there are a lot of ways to go. There isn't just a right way to get up there. How flexible are you? Yeah.
Sometimes there's a dino move. I'm just learning about the stuff that you like leap and you're like, oh, I missed it. You're reminding me too, like I like to encourage folks to think about like who do you admire? But sometimes what's more juicy is like, who are you kind of jealous of, or you envy, or you like, there's even like resentfulness, when you're like, oh, why is this person always writing these, articles, and why are they giving this talk? And it's like, oh, okay, that's juicy. What's going on there? Is it kind of pointing you in some direction of like, maybe they're doing something that you want, and maybe there's something to interrogate there.
Yeah. Or maybe they've given themselves permission to go for something that there's something holding you back. And you haven't let yourself just go for it.
Yep.
Yeah. And then for the kind of brass tacks part of it, how do you, there's sort of getting the promotion and saying, okay, great, I'm a senior designer now. And then hopefully your company has, levels, but usually compensation is this pretty broad range, because there's a je ne sais quoi of
Mhm.
all of this other stuff that goes into it. How do
Yeah.
you ensure that the compensation that you get along with the promotion matches what you feel you deserve? And how do you maybe even find resources to understand sort of what's appropriate?
Yeah, there's so much there. There's a lot. And so, I mean, I would hope that when you get a promotion, you do get a raise. A promotion, you're taking on a broader scope of responsibility, a broader scope of influence. So there there are weird little nuances. Sometimes if you move laterally from senior individual
Yeah.
contributor to manager, it's technically not a promotion, it's an adjacent move. You might not see a pay bump. Hopefully you see a slight pay bump. Um, but one thing to think about is, so this is top of mind because I was just on a chat with some folks yesterday about this. One thing that more mature organizations have is they actually have really structured pay bands for each level. So there's like a top band, there's a bottom band, and they're trying to keep everybody within the band. Um, and this is maybe a bit of an aside, but when new employees are being hired in, if they negotiate really aggressively, they can run the risk of upsetting what we call internal equity. So they might come in at a higher pay band than long-term existing employees. And that's what we call upsetting internal equity. So internal equity is like making sure that like for folks at the same level, who've been there roughly about the same amount of time, they're kind of roughly within that same sort of range. And you'll see like top performers, there's performance level increases as you go through review cycles, and you'll start to see compensation bumps. It could come through base salary, it could come through stock options. Um, so yeah, that's a bit of an aside, but sometimes if you hear pushback around when you're negotiating too hard on a salary or compensation increase on a job interview and you're hearing pushback around that, it's because they're not trying to basically screw over existing employees who have been there for years by like dumping you to a really high slot. And then there's strategy around like, well, should you I think I'm getting like on a tangent here. So there's like strategies around new roles, but we're talking about comp for how do you ensure you're getting a proper compensation increase for a promotion?
Yeah. Yeah,
That
exactly.
one's
And I mean,
tricky. Yeah.
I usually tell people it's not a promotion if you didn't get an increase. Like,
Yeah.
just changing your title is like utter bullshit because they're going to change your
Yeah.
title. They're going to give you more work and responsibility. If there isn't a commensurate bump
Yeah.
in
I agree.
equity and comp, like it's not a promotion. And
Yeah.
and I think maybe even like legally they can't define it as a
Oh, nice.
promotion
Yeah.
either. Yeah.
That makes sense. I think it's 2024, it's going to be tough, right? Because we're in hiring
Yeah.
freezes, there's layoffs. That also means there's frankly just less budget for promotions, there's less budget for performance increases. Even if
Mm-hmm.
your company, this is the maddening part, your company might go to the all hands and be like, we've had our best quarter yet. Profits are through the roof. Sorry, no promotions and no performance increases. Like, what? How? I don't understand, but that is a reality because, capitalism. Um, so there's less budget for such things right now. If the budget is tight on base salary increases during a promotion, you can also like not counter, but like ask your boss, like, wow, I was really hoping for more. Is there anything we can do around options, or equity?
Mm-hmm.
Depending on what, how big the company is, what the structure is. And making the request to your boss, they're not going to have an answer in the moment. If they're supportive of that idea and they agree, like, yeah, this wasn't much of an increase, and you're taking on a lot more responsibility, they're going to have to go back to their leader, maybe all
Mm-hmm.
the way up to an executive approval chain. So it's going to take time for them to get back to you. But all this stuff we're talking about, this is the foundation you're laying when you're managing up. It's like you've been delivering results for the business. You've been telling your boss
Yeah.
proactively, you're super trustworthy, you're reliable, you're delivering. All those things are like laying that foundation so that when the promotion comes and you're not really happy with that comp increase, you can kind
Mm-hmm.
of come back and say, I was really expecting more. Is there anything we can do around options, for example? And like, hopefully they're
Yeah.
eager to rally on your behalf.
Yeah, and the importance, especially in smaller organizations like product and design, of getting fairly regular or even just, sporadic skip levels. So that the people who are
Yes.
on that committee, it's not the first time that they saw Mercy's name. They're like, oh, Mercy, that's right. We had that great conversation about blah, blah, blah. Like
Yep.
it's human beings. We do things because of the way we feel.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah, take advantage of the skip level for sure. Hopefully you're getting that once a quarter, if not more.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Cool. Oh my gosh,
Cool.
Sally, this has been so great.
Thank you so
I am
much.
gonna work on a time machine and go give this advice to my former self. This is
Please do.
golden.